Harimi, harimi, al tirai, harimi, al tirai. Imri le'arei Yehuda, hinei Elokeichem. Harimi, harimi, al tirai.
Let's start a little bit now. So, this week we're going to talk about Parshas Sisa, but first, so we had a leap year this year.
Right.
So in the secular leap year you add a day, in the Jewish leap year we add a month, add 2 Adars. So we celebrate Purim in the second Adar, so it's closer to Pesach and Nisan. So we just had this week Purim Katan, that if it wouldn't have been a leap year, we would have celebrated Purim this year. So I want to say something in this week's Parsha is actually a hint to Purim. Oh, Rabbi, thanks for joining us. Please take some cholent, take some soda. There's more soda in the fridge. So if you look on page 486, so the Gemara in Chulin says, Chulin Kufla Matesam Abayz 139b, says, Mordechai min haTorah minayin. Where do I know Mordechai from the Torah? Where's the hint to Mordechai from the Purim story in the Torah? So it said, the Chsiv, it says, Mor Dror. The pasuk says Mor Dror, and that's on page 486 in this week's Parsha, 30:23. It says, V'ata kachlecha, you should take, it's talking about the anointment oil, B'samim Rosh, oil for the spices, oil for the head. Mor Dror is a certain type of, welcome. So it was a certain type of, what do you call it, a spice or a fragrance that was part of the anointment oil for the Kohen. So, and the Gemara says, Gemara Geminan Maradachia. If you look on the left here in the Chumash, you have the Targum from Unclus. Unclus was the nephew of Titus. He was a Roman who converted to Judaism, and he translated the whole Torah in Aramaic, which was the spoken language back then. So this Mor Dror is translated into Aramaic as Maradachia, which is a hint to Mordechai. Maradachia, Mordechai. So what does this spice, this certain fragrance, have to do with Mordechai from the Torah? So I heard from my Reshiva, I don't know if this is a Medrash or Gemara, it says that this fragrance was taken from the neck of a deer. And this deer, it wasn't able to give birth by itself because the birth canal, its rechem, was very narrow. So the way that this animal, this specific type of deer, gave birth was that a snake had to bite it and scare it so that it was able to give birth and get the baby out. And so what does that have to do with Mordechai, this deer that the snake bit? So the snake represents evil on page 46. Evil. The serpent was the one who enticed Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden. It represents the Yetzer Hara, is the Yetzer Hara, represents all of evil. And the idea of Purim is that we see even the evil is to our good in the end of the day. Right? The whole story of Purim is that Haman, this horrible fellow who tried to destroy the Jewish people, eventually we were saved through Mordechai, and we davened and fasted and everything. But through the story of Purim and through what Haman did, we had a greater acceptance of the Torah. So we accepted the Torah out of love at that point in history. It was a deeper Torah acceptance. If it hadn't been for Haman and the evil that he tried to do to us, we wouldn't have had that elevated spiritual growth on Purim. And that's why there's a halacha on Purim to drink. It says that Chayav inish lebesumi beporia ad lo yada ben baruch Mordechai la'ar Haman. A person has to get drunk on Purim to the point where he doesn't know the difference between blessed Mordechai and cursed Haman. What does it mean not know the difference? It means that you get so drunk you don't realize you want to thank Haman because look, at the end of the Purim story and the end of the Purim holiday, we got this elevated spiritual status that we wouldn't have had Haman not tried to do this evil. So you see that even evil comes out to our good in the end when we overcome it, when we conquer it. And that's why that this specific thing is a hint towards Mordechai, because it was the snake, which represents evil, that bites the deer, that scares it to be able to give birth, and that was the fragrance that was used in the oil of the Kohen Gadol. And that's why we're in Gullus, right? We have all these evil things happening in Gullus now, and the Arizal says that the word Gullus, exile, is from the word Giloy. It would be like a revelation or a clarification that the evil, through the evil that we experience in Gullus, we're going to get atonement for, and we're going to grow from it, and eventually that will bring about the ultimate salvation, and we'll grow. When we conquer these evil things, we grow in our faith in God, and we grow in our spiritual lives, and that's really every trial that we have through our life. Okay, the next topic I would like to talk about is the golden calf, the Egel Hazav, a very tragic event in Jewish history. Really in some ways it was the most tragic event in Jewish history because of really all the calamities that ever befell the Jewish people happened because we worshiped the golden calf. You know, if it wouldn't have been for the golden calf, human history would have been over. What do I mean by that? That after Adam and Eve, who we were just discussing, after they sinned, we've learned in Derech Hashem and Das Tfunus many times, that after Adam and Eve sinned, all of humanity changed. The Ramchal writes how the Garden of Eden was, and Adam and Eve were on such a high level that we wouldn't have even been able to see them with our physical eyes, that their physical is what we call spiritual. All of the existence was different. So it wasn't just that they were exiled from some lush garden with fruits and stuff growing from trees. It was the whole nature of humanity changed after they sinned. And the mission of humanity since then has been to get back to the point of Adam and Eve before they sinned. Now that happened, that really all the Ramchal writes, all of humanity had the potential to do that. But there was one fellow from Mesopotamia who took the bull by the horns and really recognized that there's one God and started to serve Hashem, and his name was Abraham. And through his descendants, since he was the only one that chose to follow Hashem, it was only going to be him and his descendants who would be that elevated people. And that process of them being elevated to Adam Harishon before he sinned, of Adam before he sinned, started with the leaving of Egypt and really culminated with the giving of the Torah. Had the Jewish people not sinned with the golden calf, they would have reached that level of Adam before he sinned, and that would have been Mashiach. That would have been the end of everything. Human history is done then. We got where we have to go, then the world is going to be transformed into the spiritual state, and we're going to get to Olam Haba. And that would have been it, period. There would have been no exiles, there would have been no Inquisitions, Holocaust, Crusades, Tachvatat, communists, Putin, Ukraine, none of that. None of that would have happened. Human history would have been done. It would have been paradise. But we sinned with the golden calf. Now, when we look at the sin of the golden calf, on the surface, if you just read the psukim, it's really hard to understand. We're talking about people that experienced 10 plagues in Egypt. They saw the sea split. They saw the Egyptians punished for the evil that they did to them. They heard Hashem speak, and then what? They just started bowing down to a golden cow? It doesn't make any sense. So I'm hoping that we could learn through the verses a little bit, with the commentaries, the oral Torah, to understand what's going on here, and we're going to realize that it's a little more nuanced than it appears. Because anytime we read Chumash, anytime we learn anything in Judaism, we have to do it through the lens of the oral Torah, through Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? There's other religions, they took our Chumash and they call it the Old Testament, and they just read the verses, and they read it on the surface, and really that's a misinterpretation when you just read it on the surface without the commentary. I think I mentioned this once before. Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was debating Richard Dawkins, who's probably the most famous atheist in the world. He wrote a lot of books, made millions and millions of dollars trying to convince people that there's no God, which is very interesting because if you believe there's no God, then there's really no purpose to existence. So why are you trying to convince people there's no God? From the fact that he's doing that kind of shows that he really kind of believes that there is a God and there is a purpose. But anyway, besides the point. So one of the things that Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks said to Richard Dawkins is, Richard, you're a Christian atheist, you're not a Jewish atheist. What he meant by that is you're coming to attack religion, but you're attacking the Bible from a Christian perspective. Jews, we never learned the Bible the way the Christians do because we've always had an oral tradition which tells us how to interpret the verses and how to understand it. And we're going to see, even if you read the verses carefully in the written Torah, in the Chumash by itself, we're going to see that it can't be simply that they were worshiping the golden calf as a god. Really, the oral Torah is explaining things that you'll actually see from the verses themselves, if you have to read it carefully. Also, you have to read it in the original. If you have, some people have a Bible that was from first it was translated from Hebrew to Greek, and then it was Greek into Latin, and then Latin into French, and then French into English, and it's 10 translations later, or whatever it is, or even just 2 translations later. But when we read it in the original, we're going to see that what Torah Sheba'al Peh says, what the oral Torah explains the verses, is really explicit in the Torah itself. Okay. right, so let's start reading what happened. Vayar ha'am. So Moshe goes up to the mountain. He's getting the Torah. Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe l'redes min ha'ar. The people saw that Moses was tarrying. He was being delayed in coming down from the mountain. Vayakal ha'am al Aaron, and the people gathered and they went to Aaron. Vayamru elav, and they said to him, Kum asalano Elohim, make for us a God, asher yelchu lefaninu, that should go before us. Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish. Sorry about that. I used this to time it, and now it started over.
Answer the phone and make the guy listen to the share.
What?
Make him listen to the share.
Yeah. Oh, just 1 second? I'll say like 1 second, I'll keep giving you the share for 20 minutes. Hello, David? Okay, this is Vayomer Elav, Kum asalano Elohim. Make for us a God, asher yelchu lefaninu, ki zeh Moshe ha'ish, asher ha'alanu me'eretz Mitzrayim, lo yadanu ma'alanu. Because Moses, we don't know what happened to him. So first of all, Rashi says, why were the people getting nervous? Because Moshe was supposed to only be up there for 40 days, and they miscalculated how long he was supposed to be up there, so they got nervous. Not only that, they saw an image of Moshe dead. The Satan fooled them, and he made an image that they saw like Moshe's coffin on the mountain, and they miscalculated the time, so they thought Moshe's dead. Like, what are we going to do? So first of all, it wasn't just like they wanted to worship idols. They thought like, we're stuck here in the desert. So that's first of all. And you see how tricky the Yetzer Hara is. The Yetzer Hara can make you see something, convince you it's real, and it's really not real. You can really believe something to be true, really believe it's real, and it's not. They really saw, they thought they saw Moshe dead. The Yetzer Hara convinced them of the evil inclination, convinced them of that. I mentioned this before, I believe, that we daven in Shabbos davening every week. V'taher libenu, Hashem should purify our hearts. La'avdecha be'emes, that we should serve Him in truth. And that the Vilna Gaon says that refers to the two ways the Yetzer Hara tries to entice us to sin. One way he tries to entice us to sin is by telling us there is no way you can survive without committing this sin. You will die if you don't commit this sin. It's called a tumah. We just think we can't overcome it. So for that, we daven v'taher libenu. Hashem should purify our hearts from that impurity that we think we can't overcome the sin. The second thing we say is la'avdecha be'emes, that we should serve Hashem in truth. Why? Because the other way the Yetzer Hara convinces us to sin is by telling us that a sin is really a mitzvah. Some people do sins, the most horrible sins, and they think they're doing God's work. They think they're doing mitzvahs. They think they're doing wonderful things. So we daven that we should serve Hashem in truth, that we should do mitzvahs that we think are mitzvahs, right? The path to hell is paved with good intentions. We always have to check ourselves that we're doing the right thing, right? Very often, people, like I said, people think they're doing mitzvahs, but they're really doing sins. I remember, you hear Rabbi Orlovsky? Ever hear him? He's a great speaker. You Google him. There's a lot of free shiurim there. He's a Talmud Chacham and he's hilarious. But he said he used to be the head of a kiruv organization, trying to reach out to Jews and unaffiliated Jews. So he said very often a lot of his employees would come and they say, let's we're only going to get people to come to participate in our programs if we bend this halacha a little bit, if we find a leniency in this Jewish law, and we do that. And Rabbi Orlovsky told them, there is a God. We're doing God's work, so we don't bend what the Torah says to do God's work. We're going to do what Hashem tells us to, and if we'll be successful, we'll be successful. But you don't compromise on your values to try to get other people to keep Torah. That's la'avdecha be'emes. People think they'll do things that are against Jewish law or, are not proper because they think they're doing a mitzvah. We're going to bring Jews to Judaism. How are they going to do that? They're going to compromise Jewish laws. It's a great mitzvah to bring Jews to Judaism, but you don't compromise on Jewish laws to do that, or even Jewish values. Don't forget Jewish laws, Jewish values. You don't compromise on your values to do that. And it's a Yetzer Hara. That's the evil inclination, trying to convince people it's a big mitzvah to make people do this mitzvah, that mitzvah, but you don't bend the Torah to do that.
Like mixed dancing or something? For
sure mixed dancing, right. That's for sure, not allowed. I remember once there was, I think someone, I believe the story was, someone asked Rav Yaakov Weinberg, he wanted to, they were going to have a thing with a conservative rabbi and an Orthodox rabbi, maybe a Reform rabbi, and this rabbi thought it was a great thing for him to do, the Orthodox rabbi, because he'll be able to speak at this convention and he'll be able to share, Orthodox views at a conservative temple with these other rabbis. And Rav Yaakov Weinberg said, you're not allowed to do it because you're actually helping their event, you're helping their synagogue, and you're not allowed to help a conservative synagogue. So in his mind, he only looked at it from one perspective, where he was thinking he could influence teach people Orthodox views. And Rav Yaakov Weinberg, the Shiva, told him, no, you're helping them, the conservative synagogue, which preaches values against the Torah. So you're not allowed to do that. So you always have to ask somebody and look at it truthfully. There's another story my Shiva told me, Rav Aaron Cutler, who founded Beth Medrash Gavoha down the road here, down Route 9, that I think it was one of his students wanted to speak at Princeton University. He was invited to speak there, a rabbi, and he was going to speak on the topic of euthanasia, which I guess I think it was the 50s. Rav Aaron Cutler passed away in 1963, was it? Around the early 60s or 62. So it's probably in the 50s. And I think he was invited to speak at Princeton, and he was going to speak about euthanasia. And he asked Rav Aaron Cutler, can he kind of like, Judaism's against euthanasia, but can he kind of like soften it and kind of like, make it sound a little better to secular ears, because maybe people will be turned on to Judaism. He didn't want to go and speak and turn people away from Judaism by saying a Torah perspective. So Rav Aaron Cutler told him, you don't get to emes built on a sheker, meaning you don't teach people truth by lying to them. You can't lie. You don't lie, right? Even if it's going to make people religious, you're not allowed to lie. Okay, so that was just a little tangent. Okay, now, also, very interesting, if you look at verse 32:4, which is on the next page, 494. Now, we tend to think that it sounds like all the Jewish people wanted to worship this idol. But Rashi points out, in this verse, Vayikach miyadam vayatzar sabecher v'yasu egel masecha. Aaron, they made the golden calf, vayamru, and they said, Ela Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, Israel, asher ha'elucha me'eretz Yisrael, that took you out of Egypt. So Rashi points out that this is grammatically incorrect.
Allah knew.
Right. He should have said, this is our God. Look, Israel, this is our God who took us out of Egypt. Why does it say this is your God? So Rashi writes that because who was the impetus to make the golden calf? It was really the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav, I was just learning with Aaron, was some Egyptians came out with the Jewish people out of Egypt, and they were there when they received the Torah. And it was them, not the inauthentic Jews, who said, let's make a golden calf. And it was the Erev Rav, the inauthentic Jews, saying to the rest of the Jewish people, this is your God, Israel. This is the guy that took you out of Egypt. Because the authentic Jewish people, the actual blood descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, weren't so into it. Now, they were punished because they didn't really protest. But the ones who initiated this, the troublemakers, were the Erev Rav, these people who came out of Egypt. So that's one thing. So we already have that the people thought Moshe was dead, really convinced. And now we're seeing that they weren't even the ones to initiate it, but it was really the Erev Rav. And that's what we see from the pasuk itself, because it says your God and not our God. Now, and the spiritual descendants of the Erev Rav still exist. You'll find that there are, unfortunately, they say the Jewish people were our own worst enemy. Because unfortunately you have Jewish people that advocate for things that are against Judaism under the banner of being Jewish. You have groups that try to destroy the yeshiva education systems in New York City, and they lie about it. You have groups that lie about Israel and put Jews in danger. And, I don't know, Kabbalistically, these people may be the descendants of the Erev Rav. It's always the Erev Rav who are causing problems in the Jewish people. And there's a lot of Kabbalistic stuff behind it, and they are affecting us till this day. Okay, now, if we're going to look also that... Yeah, okay, just checking. Because my timer got mixed up because of that phone call. So I know what it's like to be in a shiur that goes way too long. I think we've all been there. So you can always just stick up your hand if that happens. But I try to keep it limited to no more than.
Another bowl of cholent.
You have cholent. When there's food and drink, it's not as bad. But sometimes there might be cookies in the other room also. Fine. So now they came to Aaron and they said, please make us this golden calf. Now what did Aaron do? First he says, let's see, 32:2, Rashi writes, he says, go get the gold from your wives and your kids. Why did he say that? Because he knew that the wives and the kids aren't going to want to give the jewelry for this. So he was trying to delay them. So he said, go to your wives and your kids. Now also, in 32:5, it says that Aaron built an altar. Why did he build an altar? Also, delay tactic. He figured, okay, I'll tell them to go get the gold from their wives and their kids. They're not going to want to do that. I'll tell them to build an altar. And when you wait that long, it's going to take them a long time to get back. And also, he says, Aaron told them, well, we'll serve the idol tomorrow. He figured as I can stall as much as possible, and then eventually the Moshe will come back and the people will totally forget about it. Now, why did Aaron just stand up and say, make a macha, put a note on, how does it start? Make a pashkavil saying you can't worship a golden calf, and this is horrible, you can't do this. Just make a macha. So the reason is because someone tried that. His name was Chur, was Aaron's nephew, and the people killed him when he did that. So Aaron said, okay, that's not going to work. So he tried with his delaying, his stalling tactics. And Aaron was actually rewarded.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. I don't know if I can answer.
The rabbi just said that you can't do something that's incorrect, that's not truthful, just to do something to bring people closer. So how is Aaron able to make this shtick to prevent them from it sounded like he was
approving
it. Meanwhile,
so I guess the other option would be he would get killed. So that's an interesting question. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm sure there's a better answer, but I'm just thinking out loud that if you have a choice to delay somebody from doing a sin and you're only giving the implication that you're approving of something, and the other option is that you're going to get killed, I would assume you don't have to give up your life for that.
But wasn't there a difference? So the one that got killed was his nephew, but it wasn't Aaron. Aaron was known as a leader of Jewish people before Moshe Rabbeinu came.
It sounds like he assessed that. Well, Chur also was very important. He was Miriam's son, from the same family, and he got up and said, "Don't do this," and they killed him. It sounds like he really thought his life was in danger had he actually tried to stop them. But Rabbi Braun's bringing up a good point. There's a marshal in Bava Kama that says that you're not allowed to misrepresent Torah. It's actually better to die than misrepresent Torah. There's a whole thing that the Roman government sent a question to the rabbis about certain laws of damages, that if they're different between Jews and non-Jews. So the marshal asked, and they were debating what they should. So they sent back the answer, not the answer. So the marshal says, why don't they just lie? They're worried they were going to get killed by the Romans if they didn't like the Jewish law. So the marshal says, you see from that Gemara, you're not allowed to lie even to save your life, to misrepresent Torah. You can't say the Torah says X, Y, Z, even if it's going to save your life. That's how serious it is. That's how careful you have to be. So all the more so when your life's not at stake, how careful you have to be not to misrepresent Torah, which really ties in to what we're saying before. But Rabbi Braun is bringing up a good point. I would just guess that he really wasn't misrepresenting it. He was just you're saying he was implying that he approved of it because he was saying to do all these things. But I hear your question. Okay, now what actually was the sin? Were they actually praying to this golden calf as a god? Let's face it, they just came out of Egypt. They know all these wonders. They couldn't believe in God more than that. So the Ramban writes, of course, they were not actually praying to the idol. If we look back at the pasuk, like we said, this is all really hinted, or more than hinted to. It's really explicit in the pasuk, but only if you read it carefully and with the help of the Ramban, Nachmanides. It says here in 32, we'll read it again, 32:2. Vayar ha'am ki boshes Moshe l'eretz mihar. They saw that Moshe was taking a long time from coming down. Vayikal ha'am al Aaron, and the people gather on Aaron. Vayomer elav kuma salonu Elohim asher yelchu lefanenu. Make for us a God that will go in front of us. Kisem Moshe ha'ish asher halenu me'eretz Mitzrayim. Because this is Moses who took us out of Egypt. Lo yodana mehayelo. We don't know what happened to him. They didn't say, make for us a God that we should worship it. They said, make for us a God that should go in front of us because we don't know what happened to Moshe. They were not asking to build a calf to actually bow down like it was an idol, to pray to an idol. They wanted an intermediary between them and God. They thought the only way they could serve Hashem properly was having an intermediary just like they had Moshe. That's why the verse says, make for us a God that should go in front of us. Not that we should worship. It should have said, make for us a God we should worship, but it didn't say that. Also, when Moshe comes back from the mountain, Moshe says, what'd you do? What's going on here? And Aaron answers him. One second.
You're fired.
So what does Aaron say? Vayomer Aaron al yichar af Adoni. Moshe, don't get angry. You know the people, they did evil. How could Aaron say, don't get angry? So the Ramban writes, if they were actually worshiping an idol, Aaron would never have said, don't be angry. That's like the worst sin you could do in Judaism. Right? You have to give up your life before you worship an idol. Because they weren't actually worshiping an idol. They were just using it as an intermediary. Now, also, as soon as Moshe came down, what did they do with the idol? Burned it right away. If they were really treating it as a god, the Ramban says, you don't burn your god in a second, right? They wouldn't have been able to just burn the god. If they were just praying to that thing as an idol, they wouldn't have been able to burn it right away. Since they were only using it as an intermediary and saying, oh, Moshe's back, okay, get rid of it. That's why they were able to burn it so fast. Also, the Ramban says, why specifically a calf? Why a cow? Where'd that come from? So he has a lot of Kabbalistic stuff over here that I don't really understand. But the basic idea is that there's such a thing as a Merkava, it's God's holy chariot, and one of the faces on the chariot is a cow. So there were Kabbalistic reasons of why they specifically chose a calf, because they were trying to use it as an intermediary. They were trying to use this golden calf as a way to connect to Hashem. They weren't worshiping it. So just to summarize that part, so we have that the people really thought Moshe was dead. Aaron tried his best to stall the people. The people were not actually worshiping the idol. They were just using it as an intermediary. And we see really all of this from the verses themselves. Now I just want to conclude with Abbas Halevi. This is from Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, who was a great rabbi who lived about 250 years ago. So he writes that all the mitzvahs, something we've talked about many times. What?
150.
Is that more? 150? Maybe when you heard it like 40 years ago it was 150. Yeah, we'll have to Google that after.
He was nifter in 1917, I think.
Beis Halevi? No, Rav Chaim. Rav Chaim was nifter before World War I think.
No.
Okay, we'll see.
I'm pretty sure now.
We're going to Google this after. Okay, so he writes something we discussed before, that all the mitzvahs that we do have spiritual impacts the spiritual world, has spiritual ramifications. And to the point, the Beis Halevi said, if you would understand the spiritual world completely, and you would know all these Kabbalistic ideas, you could figure out the mitzvahs without the Torah telling you certain things. He says, he said specifically about the Mishkan, you could build a tabernacle, the Mishkan, without the Torah telling you how to do it, if you understood all of the spiritual worlds. The reason is because each part of the Mishkan, each part of the tabernacle, corresponds to a spiritual idea in the many spiritual worlds. And if you understood those ideas, you could build a Mishkan. And he says that's what they were trying to do with the egel, with the golden calf. Like we mentioned, the Ramban mentioned, the calf was an image. It was as part of God's throne. And the people, with their spiritual understanding, thought that they could connect to Hashem by making a golden calf, because correspondingly it would have an impact in the spiritual world. Now, what was their mistake? why was that wrong? They understood the spiritual world as XYZ, and they wanted to impact the spiritual world by doing it. So the Beis Halevi says the problem is that even if you understand the spiritual world, you can never fully comprehend God's intent, God's mind when He's commanding something. You can't just decide how to serve Hashem on your own. Once the Torah is given, we only serve Hashem based on what the Torah itself says. And he says that's why the atonement for the golden calf was the paradum with the red heifer. Because we can never understand, red heifer is something we can never understand. The idea is that we serve Hashem even though we don't understand all of the aspects behind it. We don't fully grasp it. They thought that they could understand every aspect of the spiritual world, and therefore they built a golden calf which corresponded to God's throne, and they could connect with Him like that. What was the mistake? The mistake was God didn't tell you to do that. You can't do that. As much as you think you understand, you don't understand. That's why the atonement for that is the red heifer, which we don't understand, that we do it even though we don't understand. And that's also why the atonement for the golden calf was the Mishkan. And that's why when you read about how Hashem told us to build a Mishkan, it says, and the people did like Hashem commanded, and the people did like Hashem commanded, and the people did like Hashem commanded. The idea is that they listened to everything that Hashem said. People have religious experiences. They think if they do things, again, the idea we were talking about before that is against the Torah, they think if I do this thing, I'm going to have this great spiritual experience and connect to Hashem, and everything's going to be wonderful, but second, God didn't tell you to do that. This is very common nowadays. There's a famous story with Rav Soloveitchik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University for many, many years. And a woman came to him and said, Rabbi, I want to wear tzitzis, right? Women don't wear tzitzis, but she said, I want to wear tzitzis because I think it will help me connect to Hashem. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, whoa, that's a big step. I think first you should get a four-cornered garment and don't put the tzitzis on, but wear it for a week. come back to me in a week and tell me how you feel. So the woman did it, came back for a week, said, Rabbi, I want to tell you, I never felt so connected to Hashem in my life. I felt so spiritual wearing this garment of 4 corners. Can I put on the tzitzis now? And Rabbi Soloveitchik looked at her and said, absolutely not. He says, wearing a garment with 4 corners without tzitzis has absolutely no spiritual significance. It means nothing. The fact that you think you connected to Hashem, that is garnished. Nothing. That you are just deluding yourself. Right? The idea is that we only can have an authentic spiritual experience when we do what the Torah says. Right? You have now women putting on tefillin. The Ramah says a woman shouldn't put on tefillin. Right? Men used to wear tefillin all the time. Why don't we do that? Because we don't have clean bodies. So we put it on for the smallest amount of time during davening so we can fulfill our chiyuv, our requirement, because we don't have a choice. But women who don't have a requirement shouldn't be putting on tefillin, and that's what the Ramah says. So you have people that even claim that they're Orthodox, they're women putting on tefillin. The Ramah, the code of Jewish law, that goes against my spiritual experience. If you have to do something which is against what the Torah says, against Jewish values, then that's not an authentic spiritual experience, it's just self-delusion. But that's the lesson from the Egel, that how do we serve Hashem in Judaism? We do what Hashem says. Judaism is about being mishabed ourselves to the Rebbeinu Shalom, of subjugating ourselves before God. We don't want to be those people that just we do something Jewish or we do something religious once a week because it makes me feel good. It's good to feel good. You do feel good when you subjugate yourself to Hashem. But the goal shouldn't be to feel good. When you subjugate yourself to Hashem, you will feel good, but the goal shouldn't be my own self-gratification, especially when it goes against the Torah and the code of Jewish law and whatnot. And thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry if I went overtime, and then people were getting antsy and whatnot.
I have a little kasha, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
question.
Sure,
Do we have a question and answer session?
Yeah, of course.
So, if it sounds like it was a pretty you could cut it out.
I'll cut it out. If it's good, I'll leave it.
It sounds like it's a pretty innocent mistake. I mean, the whole Gullus, the whole Inquisition, the whole Holocaust,
Right.
everything, all the pain that Klal Yisrael went through. I mean, you're right. It was very it was more more nuanced.
Right.
But how do you explain the long-term damage that Klal Yisrael did with the Egel? I mean, okay, I won't do it next time. I mean,
Right. You're saying that once we're saying the sin wasn't so bad, why did they punish so much? So I was bothered by that also. I don't have a good answer. All I could say is that since they were on such a high level, right, righteous people are judged much more carefully. Kechut HaSayra, it says, like a hair's breadth, because they're so holy, they should know better. That's really the only answer I can think of. But I feel like you need a better answer. But I was wondering the same thing. Once we say it's not such a big sin, then
why?
Right.
Why all the damage?